Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? Among the many items we have for you this week, there's news on the efficacy of vaccines and the Delta variant of the CCP virus. At-home test kits for the CCP virus being administered by Amazon of all companies. The retraction of an article proving both the benefits and downsides to the peer review process. Mutations in your genome that may be responsible for why you just can't gain weight no matter how hard you try. Let's start with the most controversial of items this week, a new review of the possible origin of the CCP virus. There have been various conspiracy theories touted, some claiming lab leak, others a bioweapon. Some have said it's a naturally occurring phenomena. We simply haven't been able to track down a point of origin for the virus. We haven't been able to find a patient zero, and we certainly haven't been able to find an animal origin for it. This has left a void, and that void has been filled with all manner of different theories. Some, as said, more controversial than others. The gist of yet another review of the evidence has concluded with the following quote: "We contend that there is a substantial body of scientific evidence supporting a zoonotic origin for SARS-CoV-2. While the possibility of a laboratory accident cannot be entirely dismissed, and may be near impossible to falsify, this conduit for emergence is highly unlikely relative to the numerous and repeated human-animal contacts that occur routinely in the wildlife trade. Failure to comprehensively investigate the zoonotic origin through collaborative and carefully coordinated studies would leave the world vulnerable to future pandemics arising from the same human activities that have repeatedly put us on a collision course with novel viruses." This seems to be the same argument being put forward so far, a general lack of evidence in the available information that would lead them to think that this is anyway related to research. And that's fair enough. You can only make a conclusion based on the available evidence. This leads us to the second story for this week, and this one ties directly into the theory of a lab-related accident. The research funding application that has been found for the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the use of humanized mice, and new bat coronaviruses. This is research that was begun in 2019 and involved humanized mice. These are mice with genes from a human inserted to replace their animal variant. They act exactly the same way they would in a human, but perform the function that they would in the mouse. This grant application existed in an attempt to more or less create mice that have the same sort of respiratory vulnerabilities that a human does. This is a slight hiccup when it comes to the first story from this week. Research indicates that the lab was specifically developing the kind of pathogenicities we're seeing now in the kind of animals that would be needed. This is not to say that it's any more likely, but there is growing evidence that it could have happened and that there was the experiments necessary for it to occurring in Wuhan at the time. Unfortunately, the same conclusion will apply anyway. That is, we're unlikely to ever find out exactly where the CCP virus came from. This largely boils down to the same repeated problems to date. The duration between now and when the virus first appeared, and the inability to track down a patient zero, an animal origin, or anything else from the beginning based on the simple time frame between now and when it first happened. It's simply too much time and too much has happened. It would be impossible to track down that original strain. That creates other problems though. All these mutations are difficult to tackle at the best of times. Every year, a new influenza vaccine is needed for exactly that reason. And even with a new vaccine every year for influenza, a disease we're incredibly familiar with, we don't always get it right. The Delta variant of the CCP virus is in exactly the same field. It's enough of a deviation from everything else we've dealt with, along with the Brazil variant, that there's difficulty in getting things to work the way you would hope. In this case, one dose of a vaccine may not be enough to provide protection from the Delta variant. In fact, you may need the second booster shot just to get some degree of protection. Even with that in mind, you may not have anywhere near the same degree of protection as you would have had were this the original strain of the CCP virus. In fact, based on both the AstraZeneca and Pfizer vaccine, there is up to a 95% efficacy in generating some kind of immunity based on vaccines. That still leaves a fairly large portion of the population who has been vaccinated vulnerable to reinfection. And not just reinfection, but reinfection without any kind of immunological defense. The small fraction who are at most risk are a big concern based on that, and that's based on any of the vaccines that are available, Moderna seeming to be the most effective overall. If we're talking about simply being infected a second time and at a relatively minor level, there is anything between a 56% and up to 88% efficacy. All of this is then further compounded by the people who aren't willing to be vaccinated. The number and nature of infections has, and for that matter continues to be, a concern. It's not entirely clear just how many infections have occurred and where they are. People generally only get tested when they demonstrate symptoms. This means the silent majority, so to speak, who are asymptomatic aren't tested, or at least aren't tested regularly. This means we can only extrapolate based on wastewater sampling, admissions, and known infection bell curves as to how many people are going to be infected outside of what is clearly known. This is inferring statistics and is not an ideal solution. Amazon's new solution to this is to send out simple, convenient, and cost-effective test kits. As much as people may think Amazon is a bad company, what they've done is fairly effective. They've developed an in-house testing program that allows employees to send in test kits that are free for them if you don't happen to be a healthcare frontline worker. The test is still reasonably affordable. It's approximately $40 and doesn't require a prescription or anything else, so long as you're 18 years or older. It comes via Amazon Prime delivery at no cost, and is then sent back in a similar manner. The whole kit is registered, and it takes about 20 minutes to go through. More importantly, it's using RT-PCR, which is the current best method available for identifying the CCP virus. While it's not a perfect solution yet again, it's still better than the current approach of only having people go to a testing location, get a sample taken, go on their way, and wait for results. In this case, people can order in the test kit, within a reasonably short order, get it, send the sample back, and find out their results. Again, in a cost-effective, time-efficient, and well-established method. Going now from the CCP virus as a disease to CCP virus as a problem in academia. A fairly respectable journal called Vaccines recently did a bit of a faux pas. They managed to publish an article that had some serious issues underlying not only the methods used to make it, but the conclusions drawn from those methods. In fact, these flaws were so fundamental and so bad that the article has now been retracted. You would think that various publishing houses would be more wary of this sort of behaviour and mistake after the 1998 Lancet disaster with Andrew Wakefield, autism, and the MMR vaccine. But there are always going to be accidents, mistakes, and people with slight oversight issues. The big issue here is that you have A, a clinical psychologist, and B, a data scientist who aren't familiar with the area of research that they're now going to publish on. This is more well evidenced by the way that they've gone about it. They've taken a phase 3 clinical trial from Israel that involved about 1 million people. They then tried to figure out how many individuals need to be vaccinated to prevent one infection, and how many need to be vaccinated in order to cause an adverse effect. They further don't differentiate between actual established side effects of the vaccine and what are suspected side effects. This means any number of a wide range of rare and unrelated events, or unrelated but somehow corresponding events, have been assumed to have association with vaccination. This is a very big problem, as they're mixing things that should not be mixed. If nothing else demonstrates it, it's this quote in response to one of the editors of the journal questioning them about what they've published. To quote, "Ideally, the consequences of this debate is that someone sets up a systematic, observational, post-marketing surveillance study in a large number of vaccinated persons under public scrutiny to really document the side effects that can be causally related to the vaccine." End quote. What they're referring to here is your normal, post-approval vaccine observations. In fact, it's observations of any medication, drug, or procedure that has been approved. There's a database of adverse events related to any use of any of these things. And surveillance is key, not just to ensuring safety of products, but ensuring that companies that have made them can continue to improve on and iterate these drugs. It's why we have new diabetes medications, new heart pressure medications, new pain relief, all sorts of things that are only possible because companies have looked at what's happening, analyzed what they've seen, both negative and positive, and taken what information they can out of it and used it to improve upon what they've developed already. All of this is why the article was eventually retracted, because it was so fundamentally flawed and, to a certain degree, ignorant of how vaccines work, how pharmacology works, and how approvals are used and then followed up on. The reaction from various academics has been even less polite than what we have, and uses language that YouTube seems to frown upon. So we have a link to the article where this comes from below, and you can see just how certain academics, researchers, and even other editors and reviewers feel about exactly what was published. Going now from data that is garbage to an actual clinical study that has merit behind it. The study looked at nearly 650,000 individuals from the US, UK, and Mexico. It was trying to understand why some people don't seem to gain weight. And their findings are genetics. In fact, 1 in every 2,500 people, or thereabouts, have a genetic mutation that leads to them having difficulty gaining body weight. This also drastically reduces their chances of obesity. Because it's such a large study pool, the researchers were able to look into not just is it a particular mutation in genes, but are there other factors such as environment? All of these things indicate that no, it's a particular gene, GPR75. There were also 15 other genes, some of these already found in prior research, and some of them novel. But overall, it was the GPR75 gene that seemed to be more closely associated with a lower body weight in general. Going now to astronomical news and an interesting comet. The comet is 46P, or Watanen. It's interesting and unusual because it has a high concentration of alcohol. Some might even go so far as to say, "Go home, comet, you're drunk." Researchers are able to establish this by using near-infrared spectroscopy. They're able to take the light that comes through the comet or off the comet, and they're able to identify which particular compounds are in it. This gives some idea as to its chemical composition. Although not perfect, it is a very good indication as to what the major ingredients are. In some cases, you can get down to fairly specific and delicate levels of detail. The final piece of news, for those of you who may not be aware, July 7th was World Chocolate Day. This may not be particularly ideal news for diabetics, but for everybody else, and especially those who are stuck at home and stressed, World Chocolate Day may just be the excuse you're looking for to order or buy a very large amount of that sweet treat. That's all the news we have for you this week. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.